November 1961. The warm waters of the Bahamas. A sailor on a commercial ship spots something small moving on the waves. It is a tiny rescue float made of cork. Inside, an 11-year-old girl named Terry Jo Duperrault lies nearly dead under the burning sun. She is alone. She has no water, no food, and wears only a thin shirt. When she is pulled on board, her eyes stare into the distance, toward the spot where her family yacht, the Bluebelle, disappeared under the water. The location is a paradise, but what happened on that boat was a living hell. This little girl is the only one who knows the truth, but the truth is so terrible that no one is ready to hear it. Let's go deep into the well. Arthur Duperrault was a successful businessman from Wisconsin who wanted to give his family a memory they would never forget. He worked hard and saved money for years to rent a luxury yacht called the Bluebelle. The plan was beautiful, a week of sailing through the bright blue islands of the Bahamas, far away from the cold winter back home. Arthur brought his wife, Jean, and their 3 children, Brian, Terry Jo, and little Renee. They were a happy family, full of hope for the adventure. To lead the boat, Arthur hired a man named Julian Harvey. Harvey was a captain with a lot of experience and a former military pilot. He seemed like the perfect choice. He even brought his new wife, Mary Dene, to help on the ship. At first, the trip was perfect. Photographs from the first few days show the family smiling on the deck with the sparkling sea in the background. The islands were like heaven, and Captain Julian was a polite and capable leader. But behind these smiles, dark secrets were hiding in the shadows. Julian Harvey was not who he said he was. He was deep in debt and had a history of suspicious accidents that always ended with him collecting insurance money. While the Duperrault family enjoyed the sun and the tropical fish, their captain was looking at them and seeing only dollar signs. The Bluebelle moved further and further from the shore, entering deep waters where no one could hear a cry for help. The dream vacation was turning into a trap, and the family had no idea they had invited a monster to sit at their table. On the night of November 12th, the yacht was drifting under a sky full of stars. The ocean was calm, and most of the family was fast asleep. Terry Jo went to her small cabin at the back of the ship early that evening. In the middle of the night, a sharp, terrible sound woke her up. It was the sound of heavy footsteps running across the wooden deck and muffled screams of pain. She heard her older brother, Brian, yelling for help. Then, a heavy silence fell over the boat. It was a silence that felt heavier and scarier than the screams. Terry Jo stayed in her bed, shaking with fear, praying it was just a bad dream. But the footsteps continued right above her head. She could hear the captain moving back and forth, dragging something heavy. When she could no longer stand the fear, she slowly climbed the narrow stairs to the main deck. The sight was enough to stop her heart. Her mother and her brother were lying on the floor in a large pool of blood. They were not moving at all. Captain Julian Harvey was standing over them, holding a heavy object in his hand. His eyes were cold and empty, like the eyes of a shark. When he saw the young girl standing there, he did not show any emotion. He ordered her in a harsh, terrifying voice to get back to her cabin right away. Terry Jo obeyed, paralyzed by shock. She sat in the dark, listening to the splashing sounds of bodies being thrown into the deep water. Julian had begun to sink the boat on purpose to hide his crimes. Water began to pour into the cabin, rising over her feet, then her knees. She was trapped in a sinking tomb. As the Bluebelle tilted and began its final slide into the ocean, Julian Harvey prepared the main life vessel. He was a man who only cared about his own survival. He jumped into the boat, leaving the young girl behind on the sinking ship. In a strange and cruel move, he threw a rope to Terry Jo and told her to hold it, but as soon as she grabbed it, he let it go. He watched as the yacht went down, and then he paddled away into the dark night, leaving her to drown. Terry Jo saw the yacht break apart and vanish into the black water. Just before she was pulled down by the suction, she saw a small, white cork float drifting near the wreckage. She managed to grab onto the float and pull herself up. It was a tiny, fragile platform in a giant, empty ocean. She was alone in the middle of the sea with no food, no water, and no protection from the elements. Around her, the water was silent, hiding the bodies of her mother, father, and siblings. As the sun began to rise, the true horror of her situation became clear. She was an 11-year-old girl on a piece of cork, hundreds of miles from land. The heat of the sun began to burn her skin, and the salt water made her lips crack. She was surrounded by predators in the water and a burning fire in the sky. For days, she drifted, losing track of time, fighting the urge to let go and sink into the blue. Her survival was becoming a miracle that defied all logic. While Terry Jo was fighting for her life on the waves, Julian Harvey had already been found by another ship. He had the body of little Renee with him, the youngest sister. He told the authorities a very sad and well-rehearsed story. He claimed that a sudden, powerful wind had snapped the mast of the yacht, which caused a fire and a gas leak. He said the ship exploded and he was the only one who could reach the lifeboat in time. He pretended to be a hero who tried to save the baby girl but failed. He cried in front of the cameras and played the role of a broken man who had lost everything in a tragic accident. At first, the world believed him. He was a decorated war pilot and a captain, so no one thought he could be a mass murderer. He was treated with pity and kindness. But the investigators noticed small things that did not add up. There was no sign of fire on the lifeboat he used. His story about the wind was not consistent with the weather reports from that night. Most importantly, Julian seemed too calm when he thought no one was watching. However, without any other witnesses and without the ship, which was now miles below the surface, the police had no proof. Julian believed his secret was safe forever at the bottom of the sea. He began to plan his next life, thinking he had committed the perfect crime. He had no idea that the one person who could destroy him was still breathing. After 84 hours of drifting, Terry Jo was at the end of her strength. Her skin was covered in sores, and her tongue was swollen from thirst. She was drifting in and out of consciousness. Suddenly, a large Greek freighter called the Captain Theo appeared on the horizon. A sailor on deck saw a small white speck on the water and thought it was a piece of trash. But something made him look closer. He realized it was a human being. The ship stopped its massive engines, and the crew lowered a boat. They found Terry Jo lying on her side, her blonde hair turned white by the salt, her eyes barely open. They pulled her onto the ship, and the crew was in shock. They could not believe a child had survived so long on such a small float. Terry Jo was rushed to a hospital in Miami under heavy guard. The news that she was alive hit the world like a lightning bolt. It was a story of survival that no one could believe. But for Julian Harvey, it was a death sentence. He was in a hotel room when he heard the news on the radio. He knew that Terry Jo had seen him kill her family. He knew she was the only one who could tell the police that there was no fire and no accident. The man who had spent his life cheating death realized that death had finally caught up to him. He checked into a separate room, wrote a short note, and ended his own life. After Julian Harvey's suicide, the police began to look into his past, and what they found was a trail of blood. It turned out that Julian had been married 6 times before. One of his previous wives and her mother had died in a very suspicious car accident. Julian was the driver, but he had escaped with no injuries and collected a large insurance payout. He had also been involved in several boat sinkings where he was the only survivor. The police realized they were looking at a professional killer who used accidents to get rich. He was a predator who had been hunting for years. On the night of the Bluebelle, his plan was simple. He had taken out a large insurance policy on his new wife, Mary Dene. He intended to kill her and sink the boat, claiming it was an accident. But he was clumsy. Arthur Duperrault, Terry Jo's father, caught him in the middle of the act. To cover his tracks, Julian decided he had to kill everyone on board. He went through the yacht like a ghost, taking the lives of the people who had hired him to be their guide. He killed the adults first, then the children. The only reason Terry Jo survived was because Julian was in a rush to leave the sinking ship and thought the ocean would finish the job for him. He was a man who valued money over human life, and he almost got away with it. Terry Jo spent weeks in the hospital recovering from her physical wounds, but the mental wounds were much deeper. For a long time, she remained silent, unable to process the horror she had seen. But eventually, the investigators sat down with her. In a soft, steady voice, she told them everything. She described the screams in the night, the sight of the captain with the weapon, and how he had looked at her with cold eyes before leaving her to die. Her memory was perfect, and her testimony destroyed any remaining doubt about Julian Harvey's guilt. She told the police how the water filled her cabin and how she had seen her mother and brother lying still on the deck. Her words were heartbreaking. The police realized that this young girl had more courage than most grown men. She had watched her entire world be destroyed in a few hours, yet she had the strength to stay alive and tell the truth. Her testimony did more than just solve the case, it gave a voice to her family who had been silenced in the dark. The world watched in awe as this small survivor stood up against the memory of a monster. She was the only reason justice was finally served, even if the killer was already dead. The story of the Bluebelle changed the way people thought about safety at sea. It led to new rules for boat charters and background checks for captains. The public was obsessed with Terry Jo and how she could ever return to a normal life. She was a celebrity, but it was a fame she never wanted. She moved back to Wisconsin to live with relatives, but the shadows of the Bahamas followed her. She changed her name to try and find some peace, but the questions from reporters and the stares from strangers never really stopped. For decades, she kept her story private. She didn't want to be known only as the girl from the boat. But the trauma was always there, under the surface. She suffered from nightmares and a deep fear of the dark. The loss of her parents and siblings was a hole that could never be filled. This shows that even when the killer is gone, the damage he leaves behind lasts for a lifetime. Terry Jo had to learn how to walk through a world that felt dangerous and cruel, carrying the weight of 5 dead souls on her shoulders. In the year 2010, almost 50 years after the tragedy, Terry Jo decided it was time to speak again. She wrote a book about her experience because she wanted to help others who had gone through trauma. She finally realized that her survival was not a burden, but a gift. She wanted to show the world that you can go through the worst possible nightmare and still find a way to live. She spoke about her family with love and reclaimed their memory from the dark story of Julian Harvey. Breaking her silence was a way of finally stepping off that cork float. She was no longer the victim drifting in the ocean, she was a woman who had conquered her past. She traveled back to the ocean, the place that had taken everything from her, and found a sense of peace. Terry Jo showed that the truth is a weapon that can cut through decades of pain. She became a symbol of resilience, proving that the human spirit is much stronger than any predator. Her journey from a terrified child to a strong, speaking woman is the true ending to the mystery of the Bluebelle. The case of the Bluebelle remains one of the most famous crimes in maritime history. It is a story that people still study today, not just because of the murders, but because of the miracle of Terry Jo's survival. It reminds us that evil can hide behind a smile and a uniform. Julian Harvey was a man who thought he could control everything, but he was defeated by a young girl's will to live. The house of cards he built out of lies and insurance policies fell apart because he underestimated the strength of a child. Today, Terry Jo's story serves as a beacon of hope for survivors of all kinds of violence. We look at the empty space where the Bluebelle once sailed and remember the Duperrault family not for how they died, but for the love they had for each other. We end our report by looking at the ocean. It is a place of beauty, but it can also be a place of deep secrets. Terry Jo brought one of those secrets back to the light. She proved that even in the middle of a dark, cold ocean, you are never truly lost if you have the courage to hold on. Her legacy is one of survival, truth, and the incredible power of the human heart. Subscribe, ring the bell, and thanks for watching. Don't forget. I'll see you at the bottom of the well.